There is a lot of turbulence right now within the landscape of women's Counter-Strike. Orgs are withdrawing in multiple regions, and whilst ESL Impact have just announced their circuit for 2025, it remains to be the same, and they've also removed all of the cash cups, meaning less overall tournaments for women in the scene. As a response to the recent ongoings, players have taken online to ask for support from Valve directly, similar to what Riot has done for the Game Changers scene. With investment coming directly from the game developer since Valorant's inception, this has created more of a clear pathway for women within the competitive scene. This is evidenced most recently by Fluorescent joining Apex within the Tier 1 ecosystem of Valorant, creating one of the first major mixed teams. There's been a lot of backlash online since the tweets have been published, coming from within the community, that I think prove the problem of the pre-existing and outdated opinions of women within esports and Counter-Strike. A lot of the criticism falling on players is that they should be working harder to grind within the space, and take the same opportunities as many teams that have grinded their way to be at the upper echelons of competitive Counter-Strike. This argument does have merit within it, but there are many external factors that paint a bigger picture. There is a distinct lack of women's players within the scene, and this will just stunt development of the scene as a whole. If you look at recent roster manias for Counter-Strike over the last competitive seasons, for example, you can see that the entire team structure can shift very easily, because there's a deep pool of players that you can look into, scout from not only Tier 1, but the hundreds of teams that make up the competitive conversation, and find a diamond in the rough. Or you could even recruit a player that's got experience playing within Tier 2 and Tier 3, and take a gamble on them. And if it doesn't work, then you could potentially just make another switch later down the line. Within women's Counter-Strike, you don't have this luxury, because the players to choose from goes from tens of thousands to hundreds. By having less options to choose from, this means that the growth and the development of rosters will have a much longer life cycle to improve. Organisations picking up women's CS teams happened quite a lot once ESL Impact came onto the scene in 2022, and having an organisation that is championing women is extremely important to the space, because it creates role models within the women's scene and shows that you can play the game, and there is definitely a pathway for you. No matter what country you're from, what region you play Counter-Strike within, there is a way for you to rise to the top. And seeing these women representing the same organisations that have a deep and rich history within the landscape of Counter-Strike not only imprints a long-term goal, but delivers reassurances that you can make it as a pro. Having role models within the women's CS scene will help encourage other women who have played a little bit before, or maybe have just watched an event, come and play and grow, which would then lead to the player pool becoming that little bit deeper. You've even seen legacy players within the Counter-Strike scene such as Giuliano and Zaz return to compete within ESL Impact after playing within the Valorant Game Changers. It isn't just about new players being inspired to play, it's also about piquing the interest of players that have previously been part of the ecosystem and are thinking about making a return. That is why it's sad to see so many organisations over the last couple of weeks abandon the projects and step away from the circuit, and I hope they come back soon. Let's now turn our attention to the elephant in the room when it comes to women's Counter-Strike. The sheer level of toxicity that is commonplace towards women within the scene at all levels of play. It's obvious from reading online that the themes of critique and toxicity are pointed towards gender and who you are as an individual, rather than what's happening in the game. Philip made a video on these issues when ESL Impact was first announced, and all of the points he made in that video are still true in the present day. More recently, Zana from Bigger Keeper wrote a statement on X that was worded brilliantly. I would highly recommend going to watch Philip's video and reading Zana's full statement. These will be linked in the description below. The overall goal and mission statement for ESL Impact and the hashtag GG for All campaign is for there to be an environment where discrimination and toxicity is removed. Women's independent leagues are not the final destination, and this is something I know a lot of the pros do not want to be in forever. The goal is to create a competitive space that can exponentially grow these players and develop them so they can be part of a shared competitive ecosystem. Mixed teams would be awesome to see in the top levels of Counter-Strike, and you can see the steps that have been taken in Game Changers to achieve this in Valorant. It is happening right now in front of our very eyes, and that is a point that I think Counter-Strike can get to with time. If you've watched any of the last calendar year of ESL Impact, you'll know firsthand that the level of competition is rising and is growing at such an exponential rate. Season by season, even week on week, it has been amazing watching this development and even watching the journeys of these players and what they've gone through. Let's now hear from the people who matter. I got a chance to speak to both AIM and Zana from the women's scene on some of the challenges they face in being a professional Counter-Strike player.
Mainly the hatred and animosity towards me just because of my gender. I think this game is culturally not safe space for girls. For instance, I could be top fragging but losing, but still targeted because I'm a woman, and it's gender specific insults thrown at us. And this is like something men haven't even had to endure. Yeah, it's like a toxic environment. Everyone knows CS is a toxic environment, but they're not targeted specifically because of the gender. And I think that's the main thing, that it's because of who I am, is that I received this hate and animosity. And I feel like a lot of it is ignorance. I don't know if you've obviously seen my Twitter. Like I say, it's ignorance. People think we should be grateful for what we have, but it's far from perfect. All we realistically want is like a safe platform and for our support to be as good as men. But it's not a safe space. And it's holding us back, I feel like. And a lot of that lack of safe space is obviously to do with Valve. It wasn't a safe space initially when the game was like created or whatever, in comparison to Valorant, where girls do have this sort of safe environment to play, and it's a lot more accepted that women play that game. I know Impact are doing their best to help us, but still, if you compare it to Valorant, it's just out of this world, right? The viewership that they get, obviously they still do face animosity, right? But not compared to what we have to deal with. Twitter these past few weeks has just been the perfect example of what we have to endure. It's crazy, to be honest.
To be honest, it's a very complex issue, I think, because it's a thing that also comes outside from CS or gaming in general, that is always gonna happen. But as I said before, like Faceit managed successfully to fight this behavior to a point where girls can be way more comfortable as they used to be before. I think that like Valve could do something about it too, like the same way as Riot is doing it by stopping the toxicity towards the girls, like in their public servers, which is where every new player starts. We all start in the Valve servers, not on Faceit. And as I was saying, I really love that Faceit is fighting these problems. But if a girl keeps playing Faceit and she managed to be at that point, maybe she already gained a thick skin from before, and she's probably not gonna quit CS. That's what happened to me and all other players. I would get toxicity, but in Valve, but I would just mute people and then continue until where I am today. But we are all different. Meanwhile, like any young girl who is gonna take her first steps, like in CS, is gonna get the usual treatment as soon as she opens like her microphone. And this is going to be her like everyday gaming experience. Then maybe she's gonna just leave CS and another game. But as I said, this is a very complex social issue. And then, of course, in a perfect world, people will behave on Faceit, not because of the fear of getting banned, but just because women would be so normalized in CS scene that they don't even care if it's a girl or a boy playing, honestly. And I don't know what it would solve, to be honest. But for example, I think if you see a 9-year-old boy being gifted for Christmas a gaming laptop to start his gaming career, like everyone would be happy for him. And meanwhile, like the same age girl, she's gonna get like the typical girly stuff like my sister did. She's very young. She got like the makeup stuff and all of this. So for me, I only started gaming just because I had friends in my school that they would always talk about CS all the time, which since my stepdad had a PC, that made me start playing PC just because he had one and he allowed me to play in it. That's the only reason why I started playing CS, because if it would be from social experience, then I would never play CS in my life.
I think more events. I know Trade are working on something, which I appreciate a lot, so I feel like I have to mention that, which is really nice. I feel like it's even just more viable if we have one more tournament a year from a different TO, because with that exposure, we'll get more viewership, and it would give orgs a sort of bigger incentive to sign teams, because they'd get more exposure as well. But it's always this argument about, oh, you have no viewership, so what do you expect? But like I said, neither did male CS until Valve gave them majors. And we need someone to step in for us, like Valve stepped in for the men. And it is like a catch-22 situation, right? Like, you can't get viewership without exposure, and you can't get exposure without, I don't know, having some sort of prominence within the scene. But it's, I don't know, it feels like we have to beg for it when we shouldn't have to. And we're told that we have to be grateful for what we have. But like I said, it's far from perfect. And I think the main sort of thing that like or like the end goal, maybe not wouldn't be seen in 2025, but is like a safe space for like younger girls to start playing the game. If they feel comfortable, we'll see plenty more talents like starting up the game for the first time, which would hopefully bridge the gap between male and female CS, because it's like a whole new possibility, right? And I think that's one of the main goals, is that it's not a safe space, we need to make it a safe space. It's not comfortable, we need to make it comfortable. And with that, we could see female players breach now into Tier 1, similar to Valorant.
I hope through this video you can now see just a small insight into the many challenges the scene has been facing throughout the years. If you want to do more for the community, then please challenge the people that are rude in your games. Have a conversation with yourself about how you would feel if you found yourself in the same situation, being talked down to, receiving backlash, and you're being judged for something that hasn't got anything to do with what's going on in game. With the VRS update to the rankings, it means it will become more commonplace that women's teams will start to be invited to some of the bigger tournaments. It was just announced that Imperial will attend Blast Bounty Season 1. It's the first time we've seen a women's team compete in the top tier of CS since 2014 at Fragbite, where BMG attended. And what's even more special is that Zaz was part of that BMG lineup and is part of the Imperial lineup that has just been invited to Blast right now. If you want to further support the scene, I would recommend watching the women's tournaments such as the ESL Impact Circuit. I think you'd be surprised at the level of Counter-Strike that's on display.